I think that they want to be prepared, but at the moment, I don't think people are absolutely convinced that we should be rolling out this vaccine for the 12 to 15-year-olds. And from my point of view, I want to see a little bit more safety data. I'm very much pro-vaccine. I've had two vaccines myself, or my family have had vaccines, but I do see side effects to vaccines. And I saw someone today, I saw someone yesterday who've had side effects to vaccines, and very little is being talked about this. When they started doing the vaccine rollout for the 16, 17-year-olds, I came on GBNews and I said, look, can we please have some data, some safety data? Can we be collecting it and telling us how many adverse events there are? Because vaccines should not harm you. They should be as safe as possible. There are side effects. I'm not anti-vax by any means, but I think when you're talking about 12 to 15-year-olds, and I support the idea that vulnerable children or children living with vulnerable adults should be vaccinated, but when you're talking about very young people, you have to consider the risk-benefit ratio. That is to say, how much risk are those children of getting COVID themselves and getting very ill versus can the vaccine harm them? And I think we just need a bit more data on that before we can make a decision.
Now, you said that you've seen side effects. So give me some of those that you thought were a little bit concerning.
Yeah. I'll give you a classic example. I saw a woman today who's had runs of palpitations since her second vaccine. And we know the vaccine causes myocarditis. She's a very healthy woman. As she runs, her resting heart rate's normally 50. She's been getting palpitations up to 150. And I've had to refer her to a cardiologist. She's the second patient I've seen with exactly that same problem. Now, that's not life-threatening. She'll recover. They usually do. A bit more worrying, I saw a patient yesterday who had an allergic reaction to one of the vaccines. And if you remember in the early days, one or two people had quite severe, this was a lady who had a Pfizer jab. She had an obvious allergic reaction. Her mouth swelled up. She was short of breath. She went to hospital. And do you know what they said to the hospital? They said, it's not the vaccine. It's not the vaccine. Definitely not. And I just wonder, this is 1984 sort of, we're giving out a message. I just wonder if the person that saw her at the hospital would have been sacked if they said, this might be the vaccine side. It clearly was a vaccine side effect. I'm against this idea of hushing up. Look, the vaccines have been amazing. They're wonderful. But I don't want us to run away with the idea that they are 100% safe and safe to give to 12-year-old children. But I want to know the data. And I don't like the way that things are being hushed up and swept under the carpet in terms of the adverse events that we're seeing to these vaccines.
So what are then the main sort of arguments for and against? I know you've talked about whether the risk and benefits outweigh, but for the 12 to 15-year-olds, if you will look at it at a wider scale and include things like mental health and the fact that the classes have to keep shutting down and so on and so forth if somebody tests positive, are you factoring that into it? So what are the pros and cons?
Right. I think that the main calculation is children don't get COVID as frequently as adults, even if they're exposed to it. They've got a very good immune system. Even when they do get COVID, they don't get it severely. Very, very, very few children under 16 have died from COVID unless they've got an underlying health condition. In fact, almost none. So you have to factor that in. As far as the schools are concerned, I think it's time we stopped mass testing and we adopted the Swedish model. If a child is sick, they go home. The rest of the class stays where they are. This idea of closing down whole classes. So I am concerned about mental health of children and more disruption in the school, but I think that needs to be dealt with by handling the cases differently and stopping the mass testing. I'm disappointed that schools are going to be testing the over 12s twice a week, because there's been a lot of evidence that schools have not been a hotbed, a petri dish for COVID spread, and that has been published. So I would say let's reserve the vaccines for vulnerable 12 to 15-year-olds, people that live with vulnerable people, but not give it wholesale, and review how we manage COVID in the schools in a much more sensible way.
An argument for, say, allowing them to actually get, if they do get COVID, so not vaccinated and they get COVID, because then they'll have a actual immunity to that specific variant of COVID, and then you have a layer of people who are actually immunised in the best way for the most up-to-date version of the disease.
Well, there is that argument. This is, I've had COVID and I've got such high immunity. I've had COVID and 2 vaccines. My antibody levels are off the scale. Nothing gives you immunity like having COVID. And if, as you say, if children can get COVID and not become seriously ill, that will give them phenomenal immunity, better than a vaccine. Now, clearly that is a highly contentious issue, this idea of allowing herd immunity to develop, allowing the virus to run rampant. But there is an argument now, since the case numbers are still relatively high, there is an argument that that's exactly what we should do. We should allow younger people to catch COVID and develop natural herd immunity, which hopefully will see the eradication of this virus quite soon.
Because potentially, I suppose, with that argument, the vaccine could actually be preventing herd immunity, as it only deals with one element of the spike protein. And actually, your own immune system can, if it handles the virus, can deal with more elements. And can I ask you then? I mean, what about the fact that it appears that the Delta variant has changed? So, in a sense, that there are more younger people who are being hospitalised now. Is that as a result, do you think, of the vaccine, or is it the fact that this variant poses a different threat?
Yeah, I've seen that data, and there's been discussion on social media. I think that's rather skewed data. I think the fact is more younger people have less vaccine immunity. Younger people are catching the Delta variant. Therefore, we're seeing more young people in hospital with the Delta variant. I don't think the young people are more susceptible to Delta variant than other people. I just think that's where the infection is at the moment. I've seen a lot of young people who've refused to have the vaccine and caught COVID. I've got one young woman who's extremely ill 3 weeks down the line because she refused to have the vaccine. I think that's really the issue for young people. The people going into hospital with the Delta variant are largely unvaccinated. And these are people over 18 who had the choice to have the vaccine and should have taken it.
So, I mean, will it be difficult if it is determined that we will roll this out to younger people? Would it be difficult logistically to do this?
No, I think the system is set up and been hugely successful. I think it's doable. They're talking about doing it in the schools. We've seen how successful the vaccination program's been. There's been this whole question about consent and Gillick competence, which I think is basically a non-issue. I think if the parents and child agree to have or not to have the vaccine, I see very few children who would wish to disagree with their parents over this. I think that's a discussion that they have between them. So that's been flagged up as a little bit of a diversion. But I think, no, it's doable, and we have the vaccine supplies. The question is, are the vaccines better used giving a third dose to older, more vulnerable people? Are they better used being sent abroad, or should they be used on 12 to 15-year-olds? And that's another question that needs to be looked at and answered.
Welcome to the GB News YouTube channel. You can watch us live 24 hours a day, catch up on your favourite shows, and join in the conversation in the comments below.
Don't forget to subscribe and you'll never miss any of our exclusive content.